You know, in the middle of the pandemic, I remember you joining us and talking about the possibility of a runaway inflation. And one of the things you talked about then was a hedge around using crypto and Bitcoin. And your friend Stan Druckenmiller had bought some Bitcoin at the time, too. Stan Druckenmiller recently had an interview with Joe Kernan at Delivering Alpha, said he's out of Bitcoin. Where are you?
I've still got a very minor allocation. I've always had a small allocation to it. I think, you know, if you think about every decade, the 70s were the decade of inflation. The 80s was a decade of kind of boom-bust, huge swings in dollar volatility. The 90s was equitization, the dot-com bubble. The aughts was the mortgage bubble and the great financial crisis. The teens were the peak of globalization and probably the peak of central bank experimentation with monetary policy, right? The 20s, I'm afraid, are going to be that period where we really focus on debt dynamics country by country, fiscal deficits, and the need to run certainly fiscal policy in a way that gives people confidence in the long-run value of the currency. And the problem that we've had really for the last 12 years is that we've done this massive experimentation with monetary policy where we suppressed yields, and we did this massive experimentation on the fiscal side during the pandemic. And so my guess is the 20s are going to be just the opposite of both. We're already seeing that right now from the central bank. We're going to, whoever is the president in 24 is going to be dealing with debt dynamics that are so dire. And so
so dire that this is the 1970s?
No, so dire that we're going to have fiscal retrenchment. And that fiscal retrenchment means that if we don't have fiscal retrenchment, that everything that we spent, if you think about the teens, which was all about suppressing yields, right? I think the 20s will be just the opposite. I mean, higher term premiums in bond markets, higher term premiums in stock markets. It'll be just the opposite of what we experienced the last decade. So in a time when there's too much money, which is why we have inflation, and too much fiscal spending, something like crypto, specifically Bitcoin and Ethereum, where there's a finite amount of that will have value at some point, someday. I don't know when that will be, but it will have value. That scarcity.
And the value at a much higher number than where we are today.
Oh, I think so, yeah.